Hello and welcome to the National FFA Finals Hall. My name is Hannah Shantz from Fallston, Maryland, and I will be your host. FFA continually strives to stimulate an interest in leadership and citizenship within members. Our second event this morning, the Prepared Public Speaking event, is designed specifically to develop agricultural leadership in FFA members by providing the opportunity for participation in public speaking activities. These students have selected a topic of their choice and crafted a speech from a series of key messages that communicate their points quickly and effectively. The Prepared Public Speaking Leadership Development event is sponsored by Monsanto. The 4 national finalists will deliver their 6 to 8 minute speech before the judges. They will be scored on components of their delivery and on their answers to topic-related questions, which they will be asked 5 minutes following their speech. To select the ranking among our finalists is no small task. We are fortunate to have with us 4 very qualified and knowledgeable judges to make that decision. Judges, will you please stand as your name is called? Abby DeMorley, Executive Director at the Washington FFA Association. David Dorfert, Professor of Agricultural Communications at Texas Tech University. Julia Wickard, Assistant Commissioner and Agriculture Director at Indiana Department of Environmental Management. Cody Feetsum, Global Biotechnology Regulatory Affairs Manager at Monsanto and Monsanto FFA Alumni President. Thank you, judges. A part of each of our speakers' score depends on their ability to remain within the time constraints of the Prepared Public Speaking Guidelines. This makes our timekeepers a crucial component of this event. Today, our timekeeper is Harvey Kenton, State Representative for Delaware. We are very thankful to also have with us the proctor of this event, Ms. Deborah Rudd, a Prepared Public Speaking Committee member. To keep our event running smoothly, you as an audience have a duty to provide a fair environment for all participants. Please observe a few simple rules. Take a moment to silence all electronic devices, including cell phones. Once the courtesy corps closes the door, please remain quiet and stay seated. If you must step out, please wait to do so between participants. Thank you for your cooperation. With the courtesy corps, please secure all doors and hallways. Are the judges ready? Our first speaker is Reagan Stevens of the Weatherford FFA chapter in the state of Oklahoma.
It was the first day of the National Reining Horse Association Derby at the Oklahoma State Fairgrounds, and I was beyond excited. Although the horses and riders came from as far away as Europe and South America, the horse I wanted to see actually lived less than 2 miles away from my house. The owner and breeder of the horse, Sherm Lauder, is a retired agricultural education instructor who started breeding sound-minded, quality reining horses as his second career. Getting to see his horse, Huggy Bear, at the show solidified my passion for horses and planted the dream of owning a reiner someday. However, about a month after the NRHA Derby, I learned Huggy Bear had bowed or injured a tendon and possibly wouldn't ever compete again. However, there was one way Huggy Bear could return to excelling at reining. Interestingly enough, the solution to Huggy Bear's injury already existed in his body, the stem cell. According to the National Institutes of Health, a stem cell is an unspecialized cell with the ability to divide for an indefinite amount of time and can give rise to specialized cells. Stem cells can divide for several months to a few years, depending on the stem cell type. The stem cell is an unspecialized cell meaning it doesn't have any tissue-specific structures that help it do a certain job. For example, a stem cell can't function as a red blood cell because it lacks hemoglobin, a chemical in red blood cells that allows them to transport oxygen. Stem cells can, however, complete a process called differentiation, in which the cell goes through several steps to become specialized. Internal and external factors affect what type of cell the stem cell will become. An internal factor is the stem cell's DNA that codes for a specific cell type. External factors include chemicals secreted by surrounding cells or certain chemicals in the cell's environment. Although the use of stem cell therapy in people is increasing, the practice is still uncommon in the United States. However, stem cell therapy is readily available in the equine industry. Mesenchymal stem cells, or MSCs, are used for the therapy. MSCs help form bone, cartilage, tendon, muscle, skin, and adipose tissue, or fat. Equine veterinarians collect the MSCs from 3 sources: umbilical cord tissue, adipose tissue, or bone marrow. Umbilical cord-derived MSCs are used less than adipose and bone marrow-derived MSCs. They can be safely collected from a foal without negative effects for the foal. Adipose-derived MSCs are harvested from the fat on the horse's hindquarters. Bone marrow-derived MSCs are collected from the horse's sternum. Currently, the primary use of stem cell therapy in the equine industry is as a regenerative medicine to treat joints, ligaments, and tendons. To find out about the most current stem cell research, I interviewed Dr. David Frisbee, a professor at Colorado State University who has completed recent research on stem cells. I asked Dr. Frisbee how bone marrow-derived MSCs compare to adipose-derived MSCs when it comes to forming musculoskeletal tissue. He explained that the adipose-derived MSCs are more concentrated in the original sample and divide faster in the lab. However, he stressed that in his trials with the cells, the bone marrow-derived MSCs differentiate into stronger musculoskeletal tissue, which makes them better in the long-term healing program. Dr. Brent Haig, a veterinarian who has also carried out clinical research over stem cells, explained, "The main advantage of using regenerative therapies is to augment healing, to produce repaired tissue that closely mimics the normal tissue function. Many times, the tissue heals with an inferior scar that limits function. Stem cells can help restore function and more normal architecture to heal tissue." In a recent trial on the efficacy of bone marrow-derived MSCs in healing musculoskeletal injuries in horses, the stem cells drastically improved the number of horses who not only became sound, but also competed at their previous workload. The multi-center trial included Oak Ridge Equine Hospital, Washington State University, Texas A&M, and Colorado State University. The injuries included torn menisci, subchondral bone cyst, and cartilage damage or loss. 67% of the horses became sound and returned to their previous workload in their discipline. All of the horses had a poor prognosis prior to the stem cell therapy, so the researchers agreed that the stem cell therapy yielded positive results. As researchers study stem cells, they strive to answer several questions. One of these questions involves autologous and allogenic stem cells. Autologous stem cells are cells harvested from and injected back into the same horse. Allogenic stem cells are harvested from one horse and injected into another. While there isn't a great deal of research available in this area, here's what experts do know. Using allogenic stem cells can be more convenient, as the cells can be harvested, cultured, and kept in a cell bank. Thus, they can be pulled out whenever someone needed a treatment. Autologous cells aren't as readily available, as the cells take time to be cultured before they can be injected back into the horse. However, when researchers compare the two cell types, there's a better response to the autologous cells than to the allogenic cells. The allogenic cells still form quality tissue. However, the tissue formed by the autologous cells is simply superior. All of this ongoing stem cell research has clarified some other important aspects of stem cells, especially the process the stem cell goes through when forming tissue. Dr. David Frisbee explained, when stem cells first started being used, people said that they regenerated the tissue. In the last few years, we've realized that the stem cells only constitute a small part of the new tissue, less than 10% of it, and usually 1 to 3%. We're realizing the ability of those stem cells to direct other cells. That's how we're viewing the stem cells now, which is a bit of a paradigm shift in the last decade. Thankfully, Sherm decided to try stem cell therapy on Huggy Bear. Much to his surprise, Huggy Bear returned to his reining career and still actively competes in the sport today. Horses just like Huggy Bear are returning to the same level of competition they were at before their injuries because of stem cells. For such a new field, stem cells have shown impressive results with the work scientists have done with them. Just think what researchers will be able to do with them once they better understand the mechanisms behind this small yet powerful cell. Thank you.
Reagan, have there been any notable negative effects or complications in animals, particularly horses, using stem cell therapy?
Currently, the only risk, when I've talked to a couple of researchers about it, is what we call non-aseptic technique. So if they don't clean the area properly, there might be a little bit of inflammation and a minor bacterial infection, but in horses, that's the only problem that we've seen so far.
Thank you.
Reagan, most of the controversy in the United States related to stem cell use is the ethics of the research being used with human embryos. Do you believe the public, especially those not in agriculture, can see the difference between using it with animals as opposed to humans? And if not, why do you think that?
So first of all, I do want to clarify. The mesenchymal stem cells are not embryonic. None of the animals were harmed, and it's actually a minimally invasive procedure to get the stem cells. So, of course, I think that clarifies with a lot of the public opinion. So, in addition to that, a lot of federal funding has been given to non-human, non-embryonic stem cells, and all of the research so far has shown it to be extremely beneficial, and there have been some risks associated, like the minor inflammation and such. But I think if society understands that they're non-embryonic stem cells, and in horses, it can actually translate over to people due to similar injuries between the species, I think they would be a lot more open to it.
Thank you.
Well, good morning. What is the average cost for this type of therapy?
It ranges from about $3,000 to $3,700, including shipping the cells to the lab to be cultured for that 2 to 3 weeks, plus the year it takes of medication, ultrasound, and vet visits. And a lot of people are put off by that, but with horses, it can take a long time to train another horse to do that same job. Plus, if you want to go resell that horse, he might not have hardly any resale value at all because you can't ride him. The conventional therapies have been proven to be not as effective as the stem cells, which can get a horse back to full riding capacity. So it comes down to an economic or emotional value on the animal. So if that animal you depend on, it's a very good investment and it will help you in the future. And of course, emotional value helps as well.
Thank you, Reagan. My question is, personally, what do you feel the role of the federal government is as it relates to stem cell research or therapy?
I feel like the federal government should look into funding, of course, the non-human and non-embryonic stem cells, they are already doing a good job. I also think that they need to make sure that public opinion of the stem cells is correct. Like I said, with the human embryonic stem cell research, I mean, when people hear stem cells nowadays, they're put off by it because of the embryonic. So I think it's the federal government's job to fund and help that non-embryonic stem cell research, as well as make sure the public is aware of the differences and the ethical considerations companies are taking into that.
Reagan, how many horses were used in the multi-center trial you referenced with a 2/3 positive result?
There are approximately, well, not approximately, there were 15 horses in the trial. And in addition, and the reason it's so hard to get animals in trials like that is not, horses can be very expensive, and especially the horses that are getting those injuries are usually top performance animals. So that's why stem cell studies are still relatively new, because it's hard to get a large number of participants in the study. Now, in addition to that study, I have looked up other research papers which include a similar number, as well as some larger numbers as well. And if you look across the board, stem cell therapy is still the most effective treatment, even with those small number clinical trials.
Thank you.
Continuing on with that trial that was just discussed in the last question, 67% return to normal workload. Can you describe what happened to the others? Why did they not have 100% results?
Some of the horses, of course, this is not a completely guaranteed therapy. And what the researchers are looking into is what is that exact number of cells that needs to be reached to the injection site. So a lot of what the researchers told me was they're not sure where the best injection route is, and of course the number. So they think that could be a discrepancy, and some of the animals had very aggressive tears of the tendons and such. And many of them improved significantly, but not enough to be categorized as back to original work.
Time.
Our second speaker is Luke Weber of the Stephenville FFA chapter in the state of Texas.
There are fewer farmers than ever before, and the average age of the American farmer is over 58 years old. These are two facts that virtually every FFA speaker can rattle off. But what if I told you a different story? What if I told you that the American farmer was not only aging, but also struggling? The stark reality is that farmers and ranchers everywhere are being oppressed by the modern-day economy. When you look at the numbers, it seems our industry has been left behind. To better understand this, let's go back in time to 1960. In the 60s, a farmer could sell a bushel of wheat for $1.79, and they could purchase a combine for almost $5,000. Now, let's fast forward to today. As of yesterday, a bushel of wheat went for around $3.99, and a combine costs a measly $500,000. That makes sense though, right? The farmer sells his wheat for almost twice as much as he could have in 1960. But the cost of the equipment he needs to harvest it has increased 100-fold. That is the reality of the modern farmer. And it begs the question, where is the economic growth for agriculture? Why has the cost of our inputs increased by over 1,000%, while the price that we get for our products has merely doubled? These statistics paint a picture of an industry that the modern-day economy has left behind. But what can legislators do to help alleviate this suffering? It is often said that policymakers often turn to the special interest. Well, I believe it is high time for people in Washington to open their eyes and their ears to a group that has long been ignored, the American agriculturist. So today I introduce to you something all agriculturists can get behind: a flat tax. With a new tax system that implements a simple flat tax, we can unleash the potential of farmers and ranchers everywhere. A flat tax will undoubtedly benefit agriculture by consolidating the 7 current tax brackets into a single bracket at 10% on all personal income. This includes wages, salaries, interest, capital gains, dividends, and business income. So, in simple terms, if you make $10, you pay $1. If you make $1 million, you pay $100,000. It's just that easy. But this new system also allows us to cut a multitude of taxes, such as the death tax, the estate tax, the alternative minimum tax, and multiple Medicare surtaxes, just to name a few. These taxes have wreaked havoc on agriculture for decades, and these cuts finally allow us to have a system that lets our industry and our economy reach its full potential. Other than tax cuts, one of the major benefits of a flat tax is economic growth. However, not just economic growth for agriculture, but economic growth for our entire country. The agricultural gross domestic product, or GDP, continues to grow at a sluggish rate of less than 0.2% annually, giving the illusion that our industry is idle. However, I believe that with some progressive changes to the tax code, American agriculture can and will overcome this economic stagnation. With the implementation of a flat tax, we will see immediate effects that benefit agriculture, such as a 44% rise in capital investment, a 13.9% higher GDP, and the creation of more than 4.8 million jobs. Critics of a flat tax would argue that the disparity between the federal government's current tax income and that of a flat tax is too drastic. They feel that social programs, government jobs, and healthcare would suffer as a result of this decrease in federal income taxes. To an extent, these critics are right. When you look at static numbers with government spending remaining on the same course it's currently on, it's easy to feel that a lack of tax income would have a negative effect on the American people. However, when factoring in the projected economic gain, more specifically, an increase in supply of labor, capital, and a broader tax base, we can expect to see even lower budget deficits than we currently experience. The budget deficit for this past year was an astonishing $440 billion. With a flat tax, that number would be cut to $768 billion over the next 10 years, correlating to an average deficit of $76.8 billion per year. This is a significant improvement and puts to bed any arguments that a flat tax would actually harm the American people. But what does this mean for the average agriculturist? What does it mean for the everyday farmer or rancher who's just struggling to get by and make ends meet? Well, a flat tax helps them the most. To better illustrate this, let me introduce you to a farmer by the name of John Smith. John has a net farm income of $50,000 and is currently paying a 25% tax rate on that income. So after losing over $12,000 initially, let's say John were to sell several non-producing cattle, or maybe a little tractor. With the sale of these assets, John now faces an additional 15% tax on the profit he made, called capital gains. But the taxes don't stop there. Because John owns his own enterprise, he now faces self-employment taxes, payroll taxes, most likely property taxes, and numerous others on top of that original 25%. This leaves John and many other small farmers like him with an average of $2,000 of after-tax income, which is troublesome for two reasons. First, John's farm shows poor financial performance, which has a negative effect on the agriculture industry as a whole. But second, and more importantly, John's farm income isn't enough to support his family. The USDA's Farm Family Income Report states that 80% of small farms, like John's, are reliant on off-farm income just to make ends meet. This statistic shows just how dire the situation is for these small farm households. However, with the implementation of a flat tax, these days will be no more. When we account for the cut to John's income tax rate, as well as the economic growth of the agriculture industry, John's after-tax income will more than double, increasing by over $5,000. This shows that a flat tax isn't simply a helping hand to agriculturists, but it is a vital necessity if we wish to push our industry and the people in it forward into the future. The FFA Creed says that we believe in less dependence on begging and more power in bargaining. Well, I, for one, don't see much bargaining in this dire situation. I see an industry full of hardworking Americans who continue to get stifled and stepped on by the federal government. I see a group of people who take to heart the philosophy of playing square with those whose happiness depends upon me, but continue to get the short end of the stick when they are reliant on others. I see farmers and ranchers across this country who are doing the very best they can, but are still struggling just to get by. However, I still believe in the future of agriculture. I believe that we will overcome these tough economic times. I believe that my generation of agriculturists can take up the mantle left for us by generations past and build an economy that helps farmers combat the struggles they face today. I believe that a flat tax may just be the first step in that process, but it is undoubtedly a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you foresee any risk or downside to this plan?
Well, I think when you look at the downside and what people often identify as something that may be, a shortcoming of a flat tax is a lack of tax revenue. And I think that that's something that most critics of a flat tax would identify as their number one concern. But when you look at static revenue, like I pointed out in my speech, where you don't account for any economic growth or anything like that, of course, there will be shortcomings in tax revenue. But when you factor in that economic gain, the increase in jobs, the increase in GDP, and just an overall more robust economy and marketplace, that's going to be more than made up for. Maybe the personal income tax may go down and the revenue from that may decrease. But when you look at the overall tax revenue, it will eventually come back to the level that it's currently at and even surpass it in most cases.
Thank you.
Luke, if you had 1 minute with President Donald Trump in the Oval Office, how would you quickly articulate your argument for a flat tax?
Well, I think the most important thing to look at with a flat tax at the end of the day is that it puts more money in the average person's pocket. At the end of the week or month, whenever, the average person is going to be taxed less, whether it's with the individual income tax or with the payroll tax, and they're going to have more money in their bank account and coming out of their paycheck. And I think that that's what is going to kickstart and drive this economic growth that I point out in my speech. And that's the most important thing. So not only are individuals seeing this, the positive effects and benefits of this, right off the bat with more money in their paycheck, but also at the end of the day, 5, 6, even 10 years down the road in the next decade, we're going to see a much more active and better economic climate where consumers are going to benefit from that directly.
Luke, in your speech you referenced critics of this flat tax. Could you highlight to us maybe some of the agricultural groups who are currently in support of this flat tax rate?
Well, I think when you look at agricultural groups who are supporting agriculture, such as American Farm Bureau and other organizations like that, they aren't really advocating for flat tax and tax reform policies. And I think that that's somewhere where my generation of agriculturists can take up that challenge and really kickstart that initiative to push for bigger things, such as tax reform and things like that. I feel like all too often, we as agriculture kind of box ourselves into our little group of just being inside of our industry, and I think that we're really taking a back seat to some of these major policy issues, such as tax reform. Even just look, for example, at our own piece of legislative, our own agenda, the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is now composed of almost 85% other things that don't directly affect agriculture, such as food stamps and the SNAP program. We've let that happen, and I think that we need to take up that mantle and that challenge, and that we need to push for these bigger policy issues, such as tax reform and other things.
Thank you.
Luke, the idea of a flat tax proposal is the idea of simplifying a tax code. But many folks, including yourself in your remarks, also associate that simplification with a reduction in tax revenue. Can we have a simple flat tax and not experience a reduction in the tax revenue?
Absolutely. So I think that when you look at making up that tax revenue while also, keeping the tax process simple, you've got to look at it from really two views. First, psychologically, and then also really from an economic basis. Psychologically, whenever you look at any time in human history, whenever taxes have been lowered, more people actually file their tax return. Whether that's because they don't feel like they previously applied, to the tax rates that, were set forth, or because they feel like, they can now afford to pay their taxes. Every time we see a reduction in tax rates, we've seen more people file. So of course, that will make up for some of that tax revenue that's lost. And I think that simplification, like you said, is going to go a long way with that. Some people, such as Senator Ted Cruz, advocate for cuts to the IRS and actually a program where you can file your taxes on a postcard, which would, of course, make that process much more simple while also cutting those rates. But second, when you look at the economics of it, such as, the growth rates in GDP and capital investment, those all seem good and well. But when you look at how that really affects the American tax revenue, those are eventually going to make up for it. For example, the Heritage Foundation reported on the past Kennedy tax cut and also the Reaganomics tax cut with President Ronald Reagan. Both of those tax cuts, everyone projected that there would be a decrease in tax revenue. But actually, even from the next year, when you saw the economic growth that had already sprung up after 1 year, they actually surpassed the past year's tax revenue by 2 to 4%. So I think that that is definitely a concern, but it will more than make up for it with the economic growth and the simplification. Thank you.
Our third speaker is Adrian Shunk of the Mason FFA chapter in Michigan.
We were traveling north through central Michigan, headed to our annual family holiday party. Tired of looking out the car window at endless fields of corn and soybeans, I pulled out my cell phone. As I scrolled through Facebook, I saw a video that caught my eye. It was originally posted by the company Hunt's Tomatoes, a division of ConAgra, and had been shared by FFA members, industry professionals, and agricultural educators. Wanting to know what all the fuss was about, I clicked play. It was a simple 13-second panorama of a tomato field. Above the field hung the words, "No GMOs in sight." No big deal, right? One would think so, but here's the catch. You can't even purchase a GMO tomato from a grocery store here in the United States. It's impossible. So here is the big deal. This commercial leaves consumers convinced otherwise. You see, we walk into dozens of labels at the grocery store. Local, organic, non-GMO, fresh, hormone-free, cage-free. The list goes on and on. It's overwhelming, it's intimidating, and frankly, it's misleading. Let's take a closer look at the commercial by ConAgra, the global food giant that not only owns Hunt's, but also 44 other brands, including Slim Jim, Orville Redenbacher's, and Chef Boyardee. In this commercial, fear-based marketing is used to deliberately imply that genetically modified tomatoes are, in fact, available to the public, therefore misleading consumers to believe that other brands may be genetically modified. These assumptions then concern the misled consumer, influencing them to buy the product with the label non-GMO. Another example is the hormone-free label on poultry. While hormones are naturally occurring chemicals within all animals, the USDA prohibits artificial growth hormones in poultry. Search grocery stores high and low. You will not find one GMO tomato or chicken breast with artificial growth hormones. As agriculturalists, we understand these marketing claims are misleading. But the food labels don't tell that side of the story. However, the labels do tell the company's tactic to reach consumers: fear. The challenge we're facing is called fear-based marketing, or fear-mongering. Fear-mongering is defined by Oxford Dictionary as the action of deliberately arousing public fear or alarm about a particular issue. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So why would ConAgra and many other companies use fear-based marketing in order to sway consumers to buy their products? They're opting out of the science-backed labeling and hopping on the fear-based bandwagon because, honestly, it's the easiest path to profit. This path has been created in large part by one of the agriculture industry's most helpful tools and largest challenges: social media. Activist groups promote propaganda, poorly supported arguments, and non-factual articles regarding the industry. Most often, these articles specifically pertain to GMOs, pesticide use, hormones, or antibiotics that misled consumers are convinced are unhealthy. Companies market their products non-GMO, hormone-free, or antibiotic-free because consumers are looking for these products. But they're far too misinformed to understand that there are no GMOs in tomatoes, no hormones in chickens, and no antibiotics in meat. How has this method of marketing become so effective? First, consumer disconnect with agriculture. Consumers, on average, are at least 3 generations removed from the farm. This means the majority of information they receive about their food is found online. Second, consumers have 2 main priorities when purchasing food products: nutrition and price. The abundance of options and jargon labels create blurred lines when it comes to nutrition, not to mention leaving consumers questioning the best bang for their buck. And third, consumer time crunch. In 61% of families, both parents are employed. In other words, the confused mom in aisle 3 simply does not have time to sort through labels before she meets with a client, rushes off to soccer practice, and plans dinner. All of these factors combined contribute to the most concerning aspect of fear-based marketing. Consumers have misled assumptions about the food that they are purchasing, thus misled assumptions about the agriculture industry as a whole. While companies strive to increase their revenue through the marketing tactics they're using, they're also misleading consumers about the safety of our country's food supply. So here's the question I have for you. How do we, the agriculture industry, educate consumers before they are easily swayed by social media, activist groups, and fear-based marketing? Here's the plan, with 3 simple strategies. Train our spokespeople, connect with influencers, and meet consumers where they already are. Let's start with train our spokespeople. The U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance has outlined an incredible model for having everyday conversations with consumers called Conversations with Ease. E, engage in conversation. A, acknowledge concerns. S, share your personal story. And E, earn trust. We will build a better name for our industry by starting conversations built on trust and transparency. Next, connecting with influencers means connecting with what the Center for Food Integrity has coined consumer food connectors. This demographic is 21 to 65 years old, well-educated, and engaged in food advocacy activities. They are shaping conversations and affecting our industry on a grassroots level. Every other consumer demographic is looking to them for information. And finally, we will impact consumers most by going where they already are every day of their lives, the internet. Using video and images, we must be authentic, transparent, and tell our stories, rather than spew facts. For example, the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance is introducing consumers to farmers virtually through their Faces of Farming program, farm tours, and blogs about the everyday life of our industry. Outlets such as these are helping share our story with consumers, thus turning fear tactics into factual information about food safety, quality, and transparency. The reality is this: fear-based marketing is influencing consumers, misrepresenting our industry in the process. If we as agriculturalists don't build trust and transparency to inform consumers that there is health, safety, and practicality behind modern agricultural methods, a misleading commercial like Hunt's will easily convince them otherwise. Thank you. This concludes my presentation. Honorable judges, I'm ready to entertain any questions you may have.
Good morning. Out of your 3 strategies, your first step, you mentioned training our spokespeople. But taking a step back, how do you recommend that we get everybody within the industry comfortable with being an advocate and comfortable with speaking up when they're put in those situations and have the opportunity?
You know, speaking up takes some bravery, it takes some courage on this subject. But the reality is, we're working with an industry that this is their livelihood. We're in a numbers game here, and we have 2% of our population as farmers, with the rest of them off the farm. And so we will train our spokespeople and get people excited about that through engaging them and saying, hey, your voice matters, because some of them don't necessarily realize that. And so by reaching out through the United States Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, through Farm Bureau, and other organizations that allow us to reach these people and train them in advocating for our industry, this will allow us to truly make an impact by using their voices.
Thank you.
Adrian, my question is, why do you personally believe that companies are misleading or are using this fear-based marketing to consumers as it relates to our food?
As an agriculturalist myself, in December, when I saw that Hunt's tomato commercial, I was upset because I know that there are no GMO tomatoes, and I know that consumers don't realize that. And so I believe that companies are using this because I see it for myself. I see people at my lunch table saying, hey, I'm not going to buy GMO, and I say, why? And they can't necessarily even explain what a GMO means. And so the reality is, I see this every single day. And so absolutely it's a problem because it's affecting our consumers on a daily basis.
Adrian, in your first example of the solution, ease, part A was acknowledge concerns. So how does agriculture do that with honesty and transparency without scaring or confusing the consumers further?
Thank you so much for this question because as agriculturalists, we're excited to share information about our industry. And we know a whole lot about food production, but that's not always the case with consumers. And so first off, I'd like to recommend for agriculturalists to become informed themselves through reputable information like the American Farm Bureau, like the Center for Food Integrity and their site bestfoodfacts.org. All of these places are great places to get reputable information as well as learn how to use it in a way that is relatable to consumers. But in addition to that, we need to realize when we acknowledge concerns, people care about the food that they eat. We're talking to that confused mother in aisle 3 that simply wants to feed their children the best food possible. And so we need to come to them from a person and not necessarily as a farmer or an industry advocate. With that being said, maybe you have kids, maybe you have grandchildren, those types of things. Relate to them through that. Acknowledge their concerns and say, hey, I also care about the food that I feed my family. And then refer back to basic facts about our industry to make sure that they have reputable information as well. And send them to places like the National Milk Producers Federation Peel Back the Label campaign. And that'll show them all of the different labels that are misleading them, but also provide them with information to steer them in the right path for agricultural information.
Thank you.
Agriculture has been using genetic research for years to create new varieties, including in tomatoes. How is this genetic research we do okay to create new varieties, but yet GMOs is viewed as bad in the consumer's mind? How would you explain the difference to a consumer?
This is an extremely hot topic right now because the reality is many companies are even using GMO in the wrong manner because genetically modified organisms has been happening for hundreds and thousands of years. In fact, according to Harvard University, there's evidence of selective breeding methods happening back to 7800 BC. And so that's just one method of genetic modification that we've been doing for thousands of years. But genetic engineering is different. We're taking one trait from a corn, plant, or animal, or whatever that might look like, and putting it into another plant to get the desirable traits. And so right now, GMOs have a stigma because consumers don't understand it. As I mentioned, most people that I talk to can't even explain what a GMO is, yet they're afraid of it. As human beings, we're afraid of what we don't understand. And so we can minimize this stigma by explaining to them in basic fact knowledge of what GMO stands for, how genetic engineering is different, and how it's truly improving our industry.
You mentioned the consumer food connectors. Do you think there's subsegments?
Thank you.
Our fourth speaker is Aaron Bacon of the Jefferson County FFA chapter in the state of Tennessee.
It's harvest time around the country. Local farmers markets and roadside stands seem to pop up overnight as farmers prepare to sell the goods they have worked long hours to produce. A small farm family heads to their local farmers market, bearing their best produce and meat products. The market is bustling with customers, happily admiring each stand in their search for that perfect ingredient for their family dinner. Suddenly, a young woman's voice can be heard above the rest. She begins to tell the crowd about a Facebook article she read that says she could ingest antibiotics through her meat source, resulting in antibiotic resistance. The article also mentioned that GMOs are radioactive and could bring serious harm to the health of her family. She says that she would love to support local farmers, but she won't buy their products because she is not sure they are safe. The other shoppers place the products back on the table and walk away. About 325.5 million consumers live in the United States. Less than 6.5 million consumers are involved in production agriculture, leaving 98% of consumers with a gap from gate to plate that is filling rapidly with confusion and misconception. Statistically, 16.4 million people believe that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. 106 million think that meat products without an antibiotic-free label contain antibiotic residue. 192.8 million believe that organic crops are safer and healthier than conventionally grown products. And 257.1 million believe that products containing DNA should be labeled. Consumer confusion affects more than just their own understanding of the food they consume. It affects the producer as well. The growing issue of consumer confusion is a state of mind that leads to consumers lacking confidence in the correctness of their purchasing decisions. This sense of uncertainty and doubt clouds the eyes of people consuming agricultural products. But why? Maybe the question one should be asking is how? How does it happen? How does this affect the agriculture industry? How do we fix it? The more I thought about consumer confusion surrounding the agriculture industry, I realized there is no better way to answer those three questions than to ask. I developed two separate surveys for consumers and for producers, inquiring about everything from gate to plate. Based on data collected from over 300 consumers, 68% of respondents receive information about their food source from a media outlet. Articles about controversial topics in agriculture, such as genetic modification, chemical usage, and animal treatment, run rampant among society, though they do not always tell the truth. Just like professional athletes and celebrity couples, the perception of today's agriculturalist is skewed by misleading information from a variety of media sources. Why is it easier to believe the stories about Frankenfoods when the tales about popular celebrities and star quarterbacks are easily understood as myths? Think about how many advertisements and articles are plastered with ideas about living a non-GMO life and organic production. While not all pose a threat to the industry, several spread incorrect information that leads to misguided interpretations of American agriculture. According to the Center for Food Integrity, only 25% of consumers have a very positive impression of agriculture. They just don't know who to trust or what to believe. This loss of trust is changing the agriculture industry as we know it, as it tears apart accepted methods of crop and meat production. For example, consumers hear that GM technology makes GMOs unsafe, when actually this tool of science was deemed safe by the National Academy of Sciences in the 1980s. Many also fear genetically modified organisms threaten their long-term health, when researchers like Alan McEwen, a UC Riverside scientist, states that there has never been a documented case of any person made ill by consuming GMOs since their introduction into the food supply. 97% of the 300 consumers I surveyed know about the use of biotechnology, but almost 50% do not know if there are any foods produced through biotechnology in their local grocery stores. Many consumers confess they would rather not purchase conventionally grown crops after reading and hearing negative information. Actually, GMOs have increased total crop yields in America by 360% since 1950, a fact that agriculturalists feel is vital to emphasize as they strive to feed 9.5 billion people by the year 2050. Animal agriculture has faced similar issues. Antibiotic resistance, hormones, and animal treatment are major concerns. I overheard a conversation in my supermarket where 2 customers agreed to only purchase chicken and pork products that are labeled hormone-free because they believe it is a healthier alternative. Many consumers likely have this same thought, not realizing that the USDA prohibits American farmers from using hormones in poultry and swine production. Dairy is not scary. The tall tales of hormones and antibiotic-laced milk from unhappy cows are just that. Tales. Every tanker of milk goes through 5 tests before it ever leaves the farm. And if there is any trace of residue, every drop of milk is discarded. It is becoming more of a challenge for mainstream agriculturalists to break free from the strong grip of consumer confusion as cost of production goes up, product demand and market price goes down, and the level of trust plummets. So how does one address consumer confusion and reestablish confidence in American agriculture? As of 2016, 80% of consumers show a strong desire to learn about food and where it comes from. Thus, we share our story, the true story of agriculture and the products of our toil. There has already been success on this front, as organizations such as Common Ground and Label Insight spend countless hours educating the public with accurate data by using social media. 78% of Americans have at least one social media account, and out of the 100 agriculturalists I surveyed, 70% believe that it is the most efficient way to overcome this challenge. The agriculture industry also recognizes that the draw of the farm has always been compelling. Therefore, agritourism is on an upward trend. Agriculturalists are inviting in consumers to pick their own products toward their operations and experience their lifestyles. As a result, the industry is seeing more engaged and experienced consumers and more understanding on both sides. With more utilization of these platforms, the agriculture industry can make a positive change. Imagine the producer standing proudly with his products at the market with less weight resting on his shoulders. Imagine the exchange of smiles, handshakes, and words between the farmer and consumer that reaffirms the trust that was once threatened. Imagine an engaged experience where consumers gather their shopping bags and hurry home to feed their families, more confident in the safety and wholesomeness of their food. It is possible to dispel consumer confusion. It just requires action.
First, I applaud you conducting your own survey. This is a really important topic. Can you share with us the process you used in gathering the 300 names of which to seek the information in the survey? Just describe the process, please.
For the first one that I developed was strictly just for consumers only, and I know that coming from a small rural town in Tennessee, I may have had a little bit of bias, so I tried to take that survey and extend it to places like Chicago, New York, and other big cities that were different from mine with consumers who didn't have a production agriculture background. I reached out to Dan Murphy of Drover's Cattle Network, and he distributed my survey to people in California. So not only did it reach members on my own state, but it also reached all the way to the West Coast. What that focused on was more understanding what consumers' opinions were based on agriculture. Where did they receive information about their food source? What made them think the way that they did? And just what their opinions were on when they heard the words antibiotic resistance or antibiotic treatment, PETA, HSUS, and GMOs. The agriculturalist survey was on a smaller scale. I only chose about 100 survey respondents for this participation. And that focused more on why did they think that agriculture perceptions were becoming a problem in the industry, and how did they see that change since 20 or 30 years ago. My father actually kind of mentioned this to me. I asked him to take the survey. He's almost 60 years old. He's been engaged in production agriculture his entire life. And him giving me that insight to realizing that the average age of the American farmer is over 58 years old. And they have seen a lot of changes come about with the increase of social media and other media outlets. So I wanted to see if that's where they thought the problem was starting. But I learned that that's not really where it's at. They thought that it was also the fact that there's just no one around anymore, and that those generation gap, the 4 to 5 that we see in the average American, is cutting off from our average producers.
Aaron, you referenced a researcher, McCugan, and folks not getting sick from GMOs in their food supply. So what GMOs are there in the food supply that could cause illness?
As of right now, since GMOs have not been a long enough time in the food supply to ensure that there is absolutely no way that they could possibly affect our long-term health, in the time since they have been introduced, there has been no illness just because of protein created. If you think back to Caitlin Shetterly was a model who claims to be allergic to an allergen in GMO corn. What actually happened is that the genetic modification does not create any new gene. All it does is take desirable ones from different products and insert them into a new thing. So she may be allergic to that allergen, but it didn't happen because of genetic modification. So there is no illness because of GMOs. There's only 10 genetically modified crops in the world, but they're not causing any illnesses within our people.
Thank you.
You cited the Dewey study of 16.4 million adults believing that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. While it elicits chuckles from even this audience here, when you divide that by the total adult population, it means that only 6.5% got the question wrong. So should we expend resources when 93.5% got the question right?
I think that no matter how many people, it doesn't matter if it's 6% of that 325.5 million number, that's still people who are affecting our producers' bottom line. So even if it is just the minority that doesn't understand, that doesn't mean they shouldn't have access to the information that we have. Farmers are among the most trusted people in this nation. And it's up to us to make sure that we're a little more proactive rather than being reactive. So before that number increases to 64.1 million in America, it's better for us to go ahead and start now, to give them that information so that we don't have this problem later on down the road as we're trying to increase to feed the growing population that's going to sprawl onto the remaining arable land that we have left.
Good morning. You mentioned that 78% of Americans have social media accounts. But how do we as an industry make sure that we are getting our message to the right audience and not just speaking to ourselves and to those of us who already understand agriculture? How do we get those messages out to those areas that are removed from the producer?
I'm actually currently a student at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, and I'm studying agriculture communications right now. And one of the first projects that we got to do was do a study on how to best reach consumers from a variety of different backgrounds. And one of the most trusted ways to do that is to reach out through Facebook articles. If you notice what PETA and HSUS and the non-GMO projects are using, is that they're using these social media platforms to reach that variety, the ones that aren't just focused in strictly agriculture. American Farm Bureau is doing a terrific job with farm videos that are reaching, just paying that little extra promotion fee so that everybody sees that when it pops up on their news feed. It gives them that maybe if you're sitting in your apartment in New York City, or if you're like me out in the hills of East Tennessee with very little rural broadband access, we're still seeing things that are happening all over our nation and giving them that opportunity.
This concludes the National Prepared Public Speaking Event Finals. Congratulations to all participants in this finals event. Join me in showing our appreciation for these speakers, judges, and timekeepers. The results of this event will be given Friday during the 7th General Session starting at 7 p.m. at Bankers Life Fieldhouse. We invite you to join us for our next Finals Hall event, the Agricultural Issue Forum, at 1:30 p.m. this afternoon, right here at the National Finals Hall. Thank you for attending and have a great day.